Hey guys, welcome back. A little bit more about contracts today. Today we're going to be talking about disclosures. So, what do we mean by disclosures? This is the seller sharing information with the buyer or the potential buyer about the property. It's nothing more than that. Okay. So, when do disclosures come into play? Well, the first thing I want you to know about disclosures is they should be part of the contract. But do we start talking about disclosures and filling our disclosures out once we have a contract? No. We ideally want to have those either in our possession from the seller or the listing agent if we're representing the buyer prior to making our offer. Or if we are the listing agent, we want to get those from our seller, from our client, prior to listing the property or shortly thereafter, so that we can share that with buyer's agents that want to make an offer on the property. Okay, doesn't always work out that way. One of the things that you're going to discover is there's an awful lot of lazy agents out there that will wait until they get an offer to ask their sellers for the disclosures that the buyer wants to get. Don't want you to be that agent. Get these filled out at your listing appointment. Okay, or in the couple of days that follow prior to your listing going live. That way you can include these in your listing. You can upload them to FMLS and to Georgia MLS so that when a buyer wants to make an offer on your property, they can download these documents and include them with the contract. And it's not something that we have to worry about or address in the future. So I want to go ahead and take a look at the count them, four potential disclosures that we're going to have with a property. And the first one that we're going to be looking at is the one that you will have most common, and that is the seller's property disclosure. Okay, this is the seller telling us everything that they know is wrong with the property. Now, you're going to have a lot of agents out there that market a property as is, no disclosure. You're going to have agents that will tell you that their owner never lived in the property, so they don't know anything about the property. So there is no disclosure. Well, one, that's a bunch of hooey. If they own the property, they know something about the property. Tell me somebody that owns a piece of property, even if it's just for a day, that doesn't know if they've had to replace the roof or not. That doesn't happen accidentally. So that owner knows something about the property. The idea behind the seller's property disclosure is not for us to tell us everything that there is to know about the property or everything that could be known about the property. The idea behind a seller's property disclosure is for them to tell us what they know about the property. And RESPA requires that a seller disclose any known hidden defects for a property. So what do we mean by hidden defect? If someone walking through the property, just using their normal senses of glancing the property over, if it's not obvious, then that's something that they need to disclose. Okay, so if there is a 3-foot hole in the middle of the wall right as you walk into the living room, is that anything that by law has to be disclosed? No, because any rational, reasonable person walking into that living room is going to see there's a 3-foot hole in the wall. But what if the dishwasher doesn't work? Is that obvious? What if there's a small leak in the coolant system for the air conditioning unit? Is that obvious? No. Foundation issues, the age of the roof. There's plenty that we want to know that aren't obvious. We're going to have an inspection done. We're going to find out more about the property, or the buyer's going to have an inspection done. But still, your seller has a legal obligation to disclose anything that they know is wrong with the property. They could get sued if something comes to light later on that they did not disclose that was known. So I encourage you to coach your sellers to disclose. Always disclose. Okay, and the way to do that is on this form right here, the seller's property disclosure statement. And we're going to walk through this, and we're going to move pretty quickly through some of it because it's going to get a little bit redundant, but you'll understand the importance of it. So if I'm representing the seller, the first thing I want you to know is we're not going to put our exhibit letter in here. Okay, this is how a exhibit is tied to a contract. A contract will list that there's an exhibit attached, and that exhibit is Exhibit A. Okay, well, if I'm filling this out with my listing, at my listing appointment with my seller, I don't know which exhibit this is going to be in the contract. So I'm going to leave that exhibit blank, and I'm going to leave the offer date blank. And then when a buyer wants to make an offer on the property, they'll put the exhibit letter in, they'll put the offer date in. Conversely, if you're working with a buyer and the listing agent sends you the seller's property disclosure, when you send your purchase and sale agreement, you need to put the appropriate exhibit letter in here that matches the exhibit letter you gave it on the purchase and sale agreement. And you're going to want to put the date that you're making the offer. Okay. The next line is the only thing on this whole form that I want you to fill out. Everything else needs to be filled out by your client. Okay. And this is going to be the address of the property. The seller's property disclosure is an exhibit to the purchase and sale agreement with an offer date of blank for the property known as 123 Main Street, Snellville, Georgia 30078. This statement is intended to make it easier for the seller to fulfill the seller's legal duty to disclose hidden defects of the property of which the seller is aware. Seller is obligated to disclose such defects even when the property is being sold as is. So that kind of sums that all up. Exactly what I was telling you guys. So the instructions to the seller are listed here. Answer all the questions. Answer all the questions fully and accurately. Provide additional explanation to all yes answers. And revise this statement if anything changes from the time you filled it out until you made it to the closing table. So if we discover new defects with the property, we need to come back and amend our seller's property disclosure and make sure that it's in here. The rest of this document is going to walk the client through the property and talk about the different systems and the different areas of the property, asking them questions and details. Here's the thing. They can't tell us something that they don't know. Okay? So if they don't know the answer to it, leave it blank. But answer the questions that you know. And your responsibility here is to make sure the seller knows what their legal obligation is, and to make sure they understand the repercussions if they don't disclose something that is a known defect. So, and they're all simple questions. What year was the main residential dwelling constructed? They need to fill in the blank. Is the property vacant? Yes or no? If yes, how long has it been since the property was occupied? We put a date. Is the property or any portion thereof leased? Has the property been designated as a historic or in a historic district? Yes or no? Any yeses? We need to give an explanation of that. Pretty simple so far, right? Well, here's one of the things I want you to understand. You've got an opportunity to share this document with your client to where they can fill it out digitally. But my strong preference and strong recommendation is that you always have your client put ink to paper. Have them fill this out in person. That way there's never any denying that it was their doing that did it. Okay? Anything that's filled in digitally could be altered, reproduced, and might be questionable at some point. If they put pen to paper on here, it becomes real obvious that they're the ones that completed this. Okay. Your other responsibility at the end of it is to go through it, make sure they answered everything completely. If they answered yes to anything, that they included the explanations, and making sure they didn't skip a section, skip a page or anything. So we're going to keep moving through this. Covenant fees and assessments. Is the property subject to a recorded declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions? That's also known as CCRs, okay? So community covenants and restrictions. That's going to be in your HOA neighborhoods. That's what are the rules that they have to follow living in the neighborhood. Is the property part of a condominium or community in which there's a community association? If the answer is yes, guess what? We've got another form we have to fill out, and it tells us right in here which form it is. It's the Community Association Disclosure Exhibit. Was the house built before or after 1978? Simple yes or no. Okay. Structural items, additions, and alterations. Has there been any settling or cracking of the foundation? Any structural reinforcement or supports been added? Have any additions, structural changes, or other major alterations to the original improvements of property, including without limitations, pools, carports, or storage buildings? Has any work been done where a residential, where a required building permit was not obtained? Did they do a homeowner renovation that should have been permitted and inspected by the county? Are there any violations of building code, housing code, or zoning regulations that are not grandfathered in? That they were correct when it was built, but they've changed the code and they're no longer relevant. And to be honest, most owners aren't going to know. They're going to put no in here because to the best of their knowledge, that is correct. Have any notices alleging such violations been received? Is any portion of the main dwelling a mobile, modular, or manufactured home? That's important because that could dramatically affect the financeability of the property. It's very hard to get financing for a mobile or modular or manufactured home. Was the dwelling or any portion thereof, excluding mobile, modular, and manufactured, moved to this site from another location? That may indicate we need to take a closer look at the foundation. How old's the AC system? Is any of the house not serviced by the AC system? Is any part of the AC system broken? Does any dwelling have aluminum wiring other than the primary service line? That's a problem. Very often that aluminum wiring has to be replaced. Are any fireplaces decorative only or in need of repair? Have there been any reports of damaging moisture behind exterior walls constructed of stucco? Are any systems or components subject to a lease or a rental plan? That's a big issue, okay? It has become really common in recent times that heating and air conditioning companies lease that equipment instead of selling that equipment. That means if your buyer buys that property, they don't own that AC system. They either have to assume the lease or they're going to need to have their own system put in. Better to have that system paid off prior to closing. Definitely something we want to know. What's the drinking source? If it's from a well, has it ever been tested? Is it on a public sewer system? Is it on a septic tank? And these questions go on, and there are pages of these. We talk about the roof, we talk about flooding, we talk about the soil around the property. Ask questions about termite, dry rot, and wood destroying organisms. Environmental health and safety concerns. Has it ever been a meth lab? Okay. Do we know of the presence of radon? Is there any lawsuits going on or any active insurance claims on the property? And are there any other hidden defects that they know of that have not been disclosed? Is it part of or adjacent to an agricultural property? They give us a whole bunch of extra space if we need to further explain any of our yeses. And then we get to our checklist. And this is a really important section. And this section is the primary reason why we do not fill these forms out for our clients. Okay. We want to know when this property transfers, what are the fixtures that are going to transfer with it? So we're going to have them mark all the appliances. And we want to question them and make sure. If they forgot to mark the dishwasher, we want to know, did you intend to take the dishwasher with you, or did you just miss marking it on the page? Okay. And some of these are going to be pretty funny in here. If you will look, there are ceiling fans that are in here. There are your speaker wires and speakers. There is your outlet covers, your smoke detectors, your window screens, a lot of things that you would never think someone would take from the property, but we want clarity that those are staying. Another big one that has become an issue in recent times is the AC control system. So there's AC unit, see home media. It is in one of these slots. But there are these smart Nest systems, like your Nest doorbell and your AC adjuster. Where is that one? The thermostat. There are a lot of homeowners that plan to take those with them. Don't know why, but they plan to take it with them. We need to specify whether that's leaving the property or it's staying with the property. And then what happens if there's multiple items? And they give us a great example down here as a reminder. You have a refrigerator in the kitchen and a refrigerator in the garage. You plan to leave the refrigerator in the kitchen, but plan to take the refrigerator in the garage. Well, you need to specify in here. We marked refrigerator up here, but we need to list down here that the refrigerator in the garage is leaving. Okay, it's not transferring with the property. The seller plans to take or keep that second refrigerator. Now, why is this so important? Why do we want this to be filled out correctly? Why do we want the client to fill it out? Let me tell you a true story that happened here in this office. Agent gets a phone call a couple of hours after closing from the buyer's agent. Hey, John. Wasn't John, just using John's name. So, hey, John, this is so-and-so. I was just talking with my buyers, and they got to the property, and the refrigerator is not there. And they wanted to check and see what was happening on it and make arrangements to have it returned. John says, wow, I don't know what happened. Let me call the seller and find out why they took the refrigerator. So the agent calls up their client and says, hey, the buyers just called me. The refrigerator's not there. You guys must have accidentally taken it when you packed up. The movers probably grabbed it, didn't know it was supposed to stay. And they're like, no, John, we were planning to take the refrigerator with us the whole time. We never intended to sell the refrigerator with the house. Oh, I didn't realize that. Let me call the other agent, let them know. Called the other agent. They called the other agent. The agent said, well, the seller's property disclosure said that the refrigerator was transferring with the property. John was like, okay, let me call my client back. He calls his client back and says, hey, it's John again. The seller's property disclosure said that you were leaving the refrigerator. And that's part of the contract. So we have to have a refrigerator there for them. And the client said, well, John, we didn't fill out the seller's property disclosure. You did. Who do you think ended up buying a new refrigerator? John did. I don't want you guys having to buy any refrigerators. Okay. So have your client fill this out. put ink to paper on here. They mark that the refrigerator is going. They're the ones that are responsible for it. Okay. Hopefully that makes good sense to you guys. Last thing on the bottom of this page, if there's anything in the house that is in need of repair that is known, the dishwasher is not functioning, the sump pump's not functioning, the hot and cold in the master bathroom are reversed, have your client list that in here. And then your client signs this. You don't sign it, okay? You're not the one making the disclosure. This is just a disclosure by the seller. So we're going to have the seller's signature, their printed name, and the date, okay? The buyer will sign this when they make the offer of the property, okay? The next disclosure, so seller's property disclosure is number one. The second disclosure is the community association disclosure, okay? This is where we're telling the buyer everything that they need to know about the HOA association that they're moving into, okay? So the seller's property disclosure, there's a house. Every transaction, there's a house. You're always going to need a seller's property disclosure. The community association disclosure, you are only going to need this if the house is in an HOA community, okay, or a condominium community. And you will see, while it says community association disclosure up here, this is also referred to as a payment of community association fees and disclosures. And sometimes when you're searching for this document, you'll need to use that alternate title to find it, okay? This, again, is just as simple of a form to fill out, but you don't fill it out. You can do some of the research and provide it to your client. You can help try and make the connection, help them find the answers, but this is their disclosure, and you don't want to be responsible for what's on this page, just like with the seller's property disclosure. And I'll tell you why here in just a second. So let's take a closer look at this form. Works just like before, community association disclosure. We're filling this out with our seller. We're going to leave the exhibit letter blank. We're going to leave the offer date blank. The only thing we're going to fill out on here is the address. Everything else is their responsibility. If we're submitting an offer for our client, everything should be filled out except for the exhibit letter. We're going to put the matching exhibit letter to our purchase and sale agreement in here, and we're going to put the offer date. Okay. As we look down the rest of this document, this is information from the seller to the buyer about the HOA community. So first off, they want to know what type of HOA or association is it. Is it a mandatory membership condominium association? If it is, we need to disclose how many units there are in the condominium, what the total annual assessment is, and how many payments it's paid in. If it's a mandatory membership homeowners association, buyers will have to pay an annual assessment to the association of what the annual amount is and how many installments it's paid. That's what your typical HOA is a mandatory membership homeowners association. But we also have communities where the membership is voluntary. If they want to belong to it, they can, and they can use the pool and the tennis courts, but if they don't want to, they don't have to belong to it. That's going to be a voluntary membership homeowners association, and we'll have the dollar figure for the annual total here and how many installments it's paid in. Is it paid once a year? Is it paid 12 times a year? Whatever that number is. Here's where things can get a little interesting. We don't run into this too much in our area, but some HOAs have both a homeowners association and a master association. So there's two different associations. And what these neighborhoods look like is usually there's a main parkway that runs through a series of neighborhoods that are all part of the same community. And everyone that lives in each of those neighborhoods has access to the big resort style pool, the big lake, the pavilion, the volleyball courts, the tennis courts, it's resort type facilities that all those neighborhoods contribute to. That's the master association. But their little neighborhood, they pay a membership to have their sign at the front of their neighborhood taken care of. And maybe they pay to have their lawn care taken care of. It may include their trash pickup. Okay, so you have both your little neighborhood and you have your master association. And in those cases, you will have both of those checked, the mandatory membership owner association and the master membership association, and what the expenses are for those. Okay, then if it's an age restricted community, we're going to add in here that at least 80% of all occupied units are occupied by at least one person who's 55 years or older, or all units are occupied by a person 62 or older. Okay, and if there's any additional fees, we'll add those in here. We're going to put the contact information for the association. Your seller lives in the community. They are paying HOA fees. They should know how to get hold of them. They're going to have access to this information a lot faster and a lot easier than you do. The numbers that are up here, they're going to have access to what that annual cost is and the number of payments a lot easier than you. The people at the HOA do not want to talk to you as the agent. You are not their client. The homeowner is. So they're going to be much more responsive and much more cooperative in talking with that homeowner than they are with you. Put that responsibility on them. I know as part of a service, you want to make it as easy for them as possible, and you will be tempted to fill this out. But I want to caution you that the things that you need to know is with this agreement, and this is the reason you do not fill it out, okay? It states in here that if the seller fails to disclose any fees that are to be paid, okay, the seller does not disclose any fees that need to be paid, guess who gets to pay them at the closing table? Your seller does. So let's say there's an initiation fee that the buyer has to pay of $1,500 and it's not on this form. The buyer doesn't have to pay that $1,500 initiation fee. The seller does. And if you're the one that filled this out and you're the one that told the seller, you talked to the HOA and this is what they said the fees are, or you made a simple typo. You intended to put 1,500, but you only put 150. You left 1 0 off. Who do you think your seller is going to be looking at to pay that difference? It's going to be you. Okay. So protect yourself. Have your client fill these out. Okay. So we're going to continue on through. We're now in section 3. As we get down here to section C, transfer, initiation, and administrative fees. This is the paragraph that I was telling you about. The buyer agrees to pay any initiation fee, capital contribution, new member fee, transfer fee, new account setup fee, fees similar to the above, which are referenced by a different name, one-time fees associated with the closing of the transaction. All the responsibility of that belongs to the buyer, okay? But the seller has to put a cap on it. At closing, buyer shall be required to pay no more than X number of dollars for all transfer, initiation, and administrative fees. Seller shall pay any amount in excess of this sum, even in the event of any later disclosures made by the seller of increases. Okay? So if they do not disclose a sufficient amount here and the actual fees wind up being higher for the buyer, the seller has to pay the difference. This is where you can screw yourself up, okay? So don't fill it out. Put that responsibility on your client. Just coach them to know the importance of this and getting the correct number in there. Working our way down, special assessments to the best of the seller's knowledge. There is or is not a special assessment. For those that don't know what a special assessment is, that's where the HOA comes together. They all vote and they decide we're going to install a swimming pool. We're going to replace the roof. We're going to pour sidewalks through the neighborhood. Whatever the case may be. And every homeowner in the association owes a special assessment in addition to their normal fees of this much money. Okay. It's very rare that a homeowner is not going to know that there's a special assessment because those are very well communicated in that HOA, required a vote, and the HOA wants to get that money. So they're going to be sending bills and they're going to be harassing the sellers to pay their part. So we need to know, have there any special assessments already been passed, or are there any special assessments under consideration? And or same thing for the master association. Okay. Hopefully we're doing good and all of this is clear so far. Notwithstanding the above, if the buyer's portion of the special assessment that is under consideration is approved for X dollars or more, buyer shall have the right but not the obligation to terminate agreement upon notice to seller, provided the buyer terminates the agreement within 5 days of being notified, after which buyer's right to terminate shall be waived. So let's suppose there is a special assessment. And we've disclosed that every homeowner is being charged $250 to put the new swimming pool in. Well, if it's later discovered prior to close that that special assessment is actually $500, the buyer can back out of the contract, okay? Provided they do that within 5 days and they're able to do that without penalty, okay? Hopefully that's clear for everybody. Then we have, what do you get for those fees? So we're paying our monthly fees. Are we getting any utilities? Do we get any service? Do we get any access to any amenities or anything on the other list? Okay. Then we want to know, is there anything about the property that's in violation of the HOA rules? And is there any litigation or anything related to the association? Disclosed there, seller has not received any notice from the association referenced herein that seller's in violation of any rule, regulation, or covenant. And then your client initials it, okay? Again, this is a seller disclosure. You're not party to this. Your signature does not go on this anywhere. This is just between the buyer and the seller, but it is part of the contract, okay? Our third disclosure is our lead-based paint disclosure. And this disclosure is a bit unique. This is the single most important document in real estate. It is potentially devastating to you financially if you are not paying attention. So if you do not have an extra $180,000 sitting around, I want you guys to perk up and pay attention. Because that is the potential fine that could be paid for not filling out this correctly, okay? For every mistake you make on this contract, this form, there is a potential $15,000 fine, and there's 12 places you can make a mistake on this contract. Do you think that's important? It's very important, okay? The other thing that makes this document really unique, outside of being potentially very damaging to the pocketbook, is this is the document out of all of ours that's governed by federal law, not by state law. Okay, so who wins in that battle? Who trumps who? Does state law trump federal, or federal law state trump state? Federal law. Always going to win, okay? So this document is governed by the EPA. They're the ones that have set the rules. They're the ones that have created the form. They're the ones that we have to stay in compliance with. And a couple of things to know about this form is the federal government is very serious about this is a disclosure, okay? So the order in which this is signed is of paramount importance. Can a buyer sign and say, the seller has given me the following information before the seller gives the information? No. So who has to sign this form first? Always going to be the seller. Okay. So let's work our way through. You guys will see exactly what I mean. Again, if we're on the listing side, we're not going to fill out the exhibit letter. We will fill in the address of the property. And this is a form where we can help our clients fill this out. I'm not worried about filling out these boxes for my client in this situation because I want to make sure this is all done correctly because I don't want that big fine. There are several locations where each person has to put their signature or their initials, and we need to mark the appropriate boxes. There's nothing for us to do in paragraph 1. In paragraph 2, it's pretty self-explanatory. It says in 2A, check 1 below. Guess what that means? One of those 2 boxes has to be checked. Okay? There is known lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards present, or seller has no knowledge of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards. One of those 2 boxes has to be checked, and the seller has to initial. In 2B, it says check 1 below. So the seller needs to check either seller has provided the buyer or tenant with all available records and reports pertaining to lead-based paint, or seller has no reports pertaining to lead-based paint. Very simple answer. And 99% of the time, it's going to be seller has no knowledge, seller has no reports. So we're going to initial, check 1, check 1. Okay. The seller is then down here at the bottom also going to sign. That's who goes first. Okay. Paragraph 3, sorry, buyer or tenant's acknowledgement. Okay, so this is going to be used both with our purchase and sale agreement, and it's going to be used with our leases if we're doing any. Okay, it says initial all that apply below. And we want you to initial A, B, and one of the 2 for C. So buyer has received copies of all information if listed above. Okay. Whether or not there was anything listed up here, we want to initial that if they've received it or if there was no information to share. Buyer has read and understands the above lead warning statement and has received the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. That is one of the GAR brochures. So share that with your buyers whenever you know that they're going to be making an offer on a home built before 1978. They have it, and now they can say that they have it. Okay. So we're going to initial, and then on C, one of these 2, just one of them has to be initialed. The buyer has received the 10-day opportunity to conduct lead inspections, or the buyer has waived the opportunity to conduct any lead-based paint exhibits. Again, 99% of the time, it's going to be option 2, okay? But it could be the other one. It all depends on what your buyer wants, okay? So the buyer needs to initial in 3 places on here and then sign at the bottom. The broker's acknowledgement, okay? Broker has informed the seller or landlord of the seller or landlord's obligation and is aware of his or her responsibility to ensure compliance, okay? You are signing as the listing agent, okay? And I encourage you, this is intended to be initialed by the listing agent. Sign it as the buyer's agent too, okay? No harm in having too many initials on the page, but this is for the listing agent to initial. The listing agent has told their client, the seller, you are obligated to complete this form and disclose all of this information about lead-based paint. Okay. But you can't go wrong as a buyer's agent initialing it also. But it's got to have the listing agent's initials on it. Okay. And then both the listing broker and the selling broker have to have their signatures on her as well. Okay, so count them up with me, guys. We've got one set of initials, two check boxes, so we're up to three. We've got 1, 2, 3 other places we have to initial, so we're up to 6. We've got 7 right here where the broker has to sign. We have 8, 9, 10, 11 places here on this new version that you could screw up and have to pay a $15,000 fine for missing it. Okay, so don't screw this form up. Make sure you understand this form. Seller signs it first. Okay, after that, we don't care who signs it after. You can sign it if you're representing the seller before or after your seller. Just know the seller has to sign before the buyer. That's paramount. Okay. Federal law states you cannot have a binding contract for any property that requires a lead-based paint disclosure. So one other thing I want to make sure that we are clear on here is, when is this document required? 2 scenarios. One, the house was built prior to 1978. The second one, often not considered, is a fixture in the property was built prior to 1978. Okay, so I want you to hear that again. A fixture in the property was built prior to 1978. So you could have a home that was built in 2020, but guess what? They went and harvested some barn doors from an old house, or they went and got a chandelier that was from the 1950s. Okay, they repurposed a mantle from their childhood home. Those are all fixtures that predate 1978, and they could have lead-based paint on them. Okay, in those cases, you are required by law to have this form completed. Okay. House was built after 1978. There are no fixtures in there built prior to 1978. This form is not required by law, but it's also not precluded. You could use this form on every single listing you have, and you would be perfectly safe. Okay, you don't have to not ever use this form. You have to use it built prior to 1978, or if there is a fixture built prior to 1978. If you've got any questions about that, get with me. The last disclosure, the fourth one, is the DeKalb County plumbing disclosure. And this is the one that you will use least often, okay? But it is a document that you have to have when you are selling a property that is located in unincorporated DeKalb County, and contains a residence or other structures constructed prior to 1993, okay? Or if buyer shall be obligated as a condition of applying for water service from DeKalb County to attach a certificate of compliance completed by a home broker. So basically what this form says, and I'm just going to paraphrase it for you, because you will see there is nothing to fill out on this form. I want you guys to look at that. All you do, the exhibit letter, which we're going to leave blank if we're the seller, let the buyer fill that in. The offer date, which we'll leave blank and let the buyer fill in. And the address of the property, the only thing we will fill in. And then a place for the buyer and the seller to initial. What this form says is, I understand that this property is in unincorporated DeKalb County, and when I go to apply to get water service to my property, I'm going to have to demonstrate that the property has low flow fixtures in the property, or they're not going to turn my water on. Okay. Well, how do I demonstrate that I've got low flow fixtures in my property? Well, you have a property inspection done. Okay. All of the inspectors here locally that do work in DeKalb County know this requirement, and as part of their home inspection, they provide a certificate that the buyer is able to present to the DeKalb County Water Authority that says, yes, this property contains all low flow fixtures. Okay. And if the home doesn't know, as part of your inspection, you're going to find out. The home inspector is going to tell you they can't issue that certificate because the fixture in the kitchen sink, the bathroom shower, the toilet is not low flow. Okay. And it gives us a definite definition of what low flow means. Okay. Ultra low flow toilets that use a maximum of 1.6 gallons per flush, urinals that use a maximum of 1 gallon per flush, shower heads that emit a maximum of 2.5 gallons per minute, and etc. Okay. So your inspectors are going to know that information. Your only obligation, the seller's only obligation, is to make sure that the buyer's aware that they need to make sure that the property has low flow fixtures. It's not your responsibility to tell them it has low flow fixtures. It's a caution to them that they need to know this, because they may be in for a rude surprise when they go to turn their water on. Does that mean you cannot sell a home that does not have low flow fixtures? No. You can sell a home with no low flow fixtures, but the buyer may not be able to turn the water on when they get it. Okay. There are some exceptions to that, and those are detailed right here. The property is being advertised for foreclosure. The buyer is demolishing the residence and rebuilding it. The buyer is a family member of the seller. The cost to put in the fixtures exceeds $1,000. The per toilet, the cost to install water consuming fixtures exceeds $2,000 per toilet in a commercial property. And if there's any questions, here's who we call. So pretty simple form. Guys, that's it. So anytime you're in doubt, just remember there's 4 disclosures that a seller potentially has to make. The seller's property disclosure should be made on every single property. The community association disclosure, if it's in an HOA community. The lead-based paint disclosure, if it was built prior to 1978, or it includes a fixture built prior to 1978. And the DeKalb County plumbing disclosure, if it's in unincorporated DeKalb County. Hope you guys learned something valuable today. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.